I awakened to the sound of wedding bells. Not figurative, nor the distant sound of a religious event, but genuine wedding bells ringing from someplace on my land. Initially, I believed I was experiencing a dream. Perhaps Mrs. Thompson, my inquisitive neighbor, had ultimately embraced eccentricity and resolved to organize a parade in my honor. As I emerged onto my porch, blinking my eyes, the sight before me nearly caused me to drop my coffee mug. An opulent wedding arrangement was situated in the center of my property. Rows of white chairs, a flowery arch, a lengthy red carpet leading to an altar, and a lavish buffet table replete with exquisite cuisine. Attendees in beautiful gowns and tuxedos congregated, champagne flutes in hand, laughing as if they were entitled to be present. At the middle of the chaos, issuing commands to a group of visibly distressed caterers, stood Karen. Karen, the self-designated queen of entitlement. The identical woman who previously exhibited outrage at the local farmer's market due to my refusal to sell her goat milk at a discounted rate of 50%. The identical woman who rendered every cashier in town discontented with her requests for preferential treatment. Now, she was conducting a lavish wedding on my land without prior consent. I descended the steps rapidly, traversing my field while evading bewildered people who regarded me as the interloper. A waiter with a tray of hors d'oeuvres acknowledged me with a courteous nod before presenting a shrimp cocktail. I suppressed the impulse to seize the entire tray and hurl it into the air in a fit of frustration. "Pardon me," I inquired, striving to maintain a steady tone as I approached a woman in a headset who was anxiously perusing a clipboard. "What is occurring here?" She scarcely afforded me a glance. "Sir, I am somewhat occupied. If you require assistance, kindly consult the event planner." "The event planner?" I reiterated. "I possess this farm." That captured her attention. She glanced upward, her eyes widening in terror. "Oh, alas." "Indeed," I remarked, folding my arms. "I will inquire once more. What is occurring?" Before she could respond, a recognizable, jarring voice pierced through the crowd like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, for heaven's sake, what now?" Karen appeared in an extravagant lavender gown, adorned with pearls, and clutching a champagne flute as if she were royalty. She cast a glance in my direction and moaned theatrically, as though I were the source of inconvenience. "Ah, it's you," she remarked, gesturing dismissively. "What is the issue? What is the—" I chuckled, utterly bewildered. "Karen, you are conducting a wedding on my property without prior consent." Karen dismissed the concern with an eye roll. "Calm down, it's merely for the day. My niece is getting married. I required a picturesque location, and your property was ideal. You ought to feel flattered." "Flattered?" I exclaimed, my voice escalating. "You encroached upon my property, orchestrated an entire event, invited hundreds of individuals onto my land, and lacked the courtesy to consult me?" "Do not be so theatrical," she chided, sipping her champagne. "You are not utilizing this space. It consists merely of fields. Furthermore, I attempted to contact you. I retrieved my phone, yet amusingly, I observed no missed calls." She gestured again. "Minor details. The wedding is already occurring, and it is too late to alter any arrangements. Why not return to your usual activities and let us to celebrate?" I surveyed my surroundings, still grappling with the unfolding events. The bride and groom, Karen's niece and her fiancé, appeared unaware that they were effectively perpetrating a wedding theft. The guests laughed, toasted with glasses, and appreciated the purloined scenery. Subsequently, Karen exhibited a sneer. "Furthermore, you ought to appreciate the exposure. Envision the business opportunities that will arise from this." That was the moment my remaining patience fractured like a weathered fence post in a tempest. She presumed she could simply intrude upon my property, host a celebration, and anticipate my gratitude? I took a deep breath, compelling a smile. "You know what, Karen? You are correct. It is too late to alter anything. The wedding is currently underway," Karen remarked, her expression one of smug satisfaction. "Indeed. Now, if you will excuse me, I have significant guests to attend to." I turned and proceeded towards the barn, maintaining a neutral expression. The sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and a live string quartet playing an elegant melody lingered in the air. However, I was already devising my strategy. If Karen wished to feign ownership of my farm, she was about to experience its full reality. Upon reaching the barn, I whistled softly. Within moments, the heads of my most dependable mischief makers emerged. Bessie, my obstinate goat, with a penchant for consuming inappropriate items. Thor, the self-proclaimed leader of the herd, who once gnawed through my truck's wiring for amusement. And, of course, Little Peanut, who appeared innocent yet possessed a talent for infiltrating forbidden areas. I opened the gate, grinning. "Go fetch your snacks, boys." Like a meticulously prepared battalion, they advanced, their gaze fixed on the buffet table in the distance. Upon my return to the wedding, the turmoil had already commenced. A scream echoed through the atmosphere. "Oh my God, a goat is consuming the wedding cake." I returned just as the calamity transpired. Bessie had ascended the buffet table, burying her snout into a platter of salmon. Thor had already headbutted a waiter, causing a cascade of champagne flutes to shatter on the floor. Meanwhile, Little Peanut had somehow reached the dance floor, toppling an elderly guest cane before launching himself onto the DJ booth. Guests screamed in panic. Someone attempted to pursue Bessie, but she was already midway through ravaging the floral arrangements. A bridesmaid stumbled over a goat, landing face first into a mound of hors d'oeuvres. Karen's complexion turned an unprecedented shade of purple as she shrieked in terror. "Jake!" she shouted loudly. "Call them off." I leisurely crossed my arms, observing my goats cause utter chaos. "Oh, I would, Karen. However, it is too late to alter anything. The event is currently underway." She emitted an infuriated scream as Bessie bounded onto the head table, toppling the centerpiece and scattering a trail of shredded flowers behind her. Guests scattered in various ways, evading aggressive goats, stumbling over chairs, and attempting to salvage the remnants of the wedding. As Karen struggled in vain, witnessing her flawless occasion devolve into chaos, I rested against a fence post, appreciating the picturesque scene. It was unequivocally the finest wedding I have ever attended. The wedding had officially devolved into anarchy, and it was a spectacle of beauty. Guests were shrieking, evading errant goats as they ravaged the buffet, toppling costly dishes and table adornments as if engaged in a farm animal demolition derby. The DJ endeavored to maintain the music, but this attempt was swiftly relinquished when Peanut leaped into the booth, causing the sound equipment to plummet to the floor in a dramatic eruption of static and sparks. The best man sought to seize a plate of food before Thor, my most enterprising goat, seized it from his grasp and raced away victorious. Karen, positioned amidst the debris, appeared as though she had just observed a biblical catastrophe. Her impeccably arranged hair was marred by an errant splash of champagne. Her lavender dress was stained with cake frosting, and her fancy heels were becoming ensnared in the dirt. She was vociferously imploring anyone who would heed her, although the wedding staff had already retreated, distancing themselves as if they wished to dissociate from the impending calamity. The bride and groom, utterly astonished by the unfolding events, remained motionless in disbelief while a goat endeavored to chew on the bride's veil. I nonchalantly traversed the devastation, advancing toward the buffet table as though I were only an unwitting spectator in the situation. Bessie, my most voracious goat, had her entire head immersed in a huge salad bowl, devouring with fervor. A waiter, seemingly still harboring the hope of salvaging the situation, lunged forward in an effort to dismiss her. Bessie, completely unfazed, raised her head and emitted a resounding, contented belch in his direction. He recoiled, appearing as though he had been profoundly betrayed by the animal realm. I eventually confronted Karen, who faced me with a fury capable of melting steel. Her hands trembled, her face exhibited an unprecedented shade of crimson, and she appeared on the verge of a real tantrum. "Jake!" she shrieked, her voice so piercing that several neighboring goats visibly recoiled. "Revoke their engagement. Currently." I inhaled deeply, as though contemplating her request. I observed my goats, contentedly grazing, engaging in head-butting with wedding guests, and treating the entire occasion as their personal playground. I expressed indifference by a shrug. I stated, with the most guileless demeanor I could muster. However, it is quite challenging to halt an action after it has commenced. Like a wedding, indeed. Once it commences, you must allow it to unfold. Karen appeared on the verge of an outburst. This is not a nuptial ceremony. This constitutes a catastrophe. I nonchalantly selected an unblemished piece of cake from a nearby table and took a bite. It was unexpectedly excellent. Indeed, it appears to be an exceptional wedding to me. Enjoyable, vibrant, unforgettable. I would characterize it as a success. Karen emitted an infuriated scream and stamped her foot like a child. I will have you apprehended for this. That captured my attention. I arched an eyebrow, swallowing the morsel of cake. Is that so? What precisely will you communicate to the authorities, Karen? You encroached into my property, conducted a wedding without my consent, and subsequently expressed anger when my livestock behaved in a manner typical of their species. Karen's mouth opened and closed akin to a fish struggling for oxygen. She evidently did not anticipate being cornered so swiftly. Regrettably for her, she was contending with an individual who possessed the advantage. I possessed every legal justification to be enraged. This was my property, and she had usurped it as if she were an entitled sovereign, anticipating my acquiescence. If she believed she could intimidate me into compliance, she was mistaken. However, just when I believed I had decisively triumphed in this conflict, Karen executed an unforeseen action. She retrieved her phone, her eyes shining with a malicious delight characteristic of her disposition. "Do you consider yourself exceptionally intelligent?" She scoffed. "Let us observe your intelligence when law enforcement arrives." I observed her as she dialed and spoke rapidly into the phone. My confidence faltered momentarily. I was confident in my position. However, the prospect of law enforcement arriving at my farm among this complete chaos was far from enticing. It would not be difficult for Karen to distort the narrative, portraying me as a deranged farmer who assaulted an innocent wedding. Even if the truth ultimately emerged, the burden of addressing it was not something I want. I observed my goats, who remained vigorous. Thor had inexplicably acquired a tablecloth and was now embroiled in a fierce tug-of-war with an elderly guest who appeared to be reevaluating every life choice that had culminated at this moment. Bessie had progressed beyond the salad and was now endeavoring to ascend a gift table, inadvertently toppling items in the process. Simultaneously, Peanut assumed his appropriate position on the dance floor, joyfully trampling the remnants of a broken wine glass. Karen concluded her call and regarded me with a sneer. "You are currently in a predicament." I exhaled audibly. This was poised to become chaotic. 10 minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the air, causing the already agitated wedding guests to disperse even more. 2 police officers exited their cruiser, surveying the scene with identical faces of incredulity. One individual unfortunately ventured too near to Bessie, who promptly endeavored to gnaw at his belt. He dismissed her with a smack, his eyes sharpening as he directed his gaze on me. "Sir," he inquired, "would you be willing to elucidate the situation at hand?" Before I could respond, Karen interjected, propelling herself forward as though she were the unfortunate victim of an unspeakable atrocity. "Officer, I am grateful for your presence. This individual is entirely unmanageable. He released wild animals during my niece's wedding. They have caused extensive destruction, and he declines to accept responsibility." I gazed at her, astonished by her capacity to articulate a half-truth with such assurance. The officers faced me, anticipating my account of the events. I folded my arms. "Officer, the matter is as follows. This is my agricultural estate. I did not authorize this wedding to take place here. These individuals encroached upon my property, organized a complete celebration without my consent, and anticipated my acquiescence. I permitted my goats to partake in the festivities." The policeman shared a look. One of them exhaled deeply, massaging his forehead as if he were already experiencing a headache. Do you possess evidence that she committed trespass? I smiled broadly. I surpassed that. I possess a witness. As if prompted, Mrs. Thompson appeared from behind a tree, grasping her smartphone as though it were the Holy Grail. She proclaimed with pride that she recorded everything on video. He is being truthful. The woman appropriated his farm at a wedding, and she is now attempting to portray herself as the victim. Characteristic Karen conduct. Karen's complexion paled. You old crone. Mrs. Thompson smiled broadly. Exercise caution, my dear. I may submit this to the news media. The cops acquiesced. It appears we have sufficient resources here. Madam, you are required to accompany us for interrogation. Karen emitted a deafening scream as she was escorted away, thrashing about like a child deprived of a toy. The visitors, now utterly embarrassed, commenced discreetly collecting their belongings and proceeded toward the exit with an excruciatingly awkward gait of humiliation. I surveyed the disarray, then glanced at my goats, who were contentedly munching on wedding decorations. Taking a deep, contented breath, I nodded in approval. Excellent performance, team. The consequences of the significant goat invasion were remarkable. The formerly immaculate wedding location, which had epitomized elegance and sophistication than an hour prior, now resembled a battleground dominated by four-legged, famished, and utterly unrepentant creatures. Ripped floral arrangements scattered the ground, crushed into the soil with broken champagne flutes and fragments of a once splendid wedding cake. The gift table was upended, with half the toys unwrapped and strewn across the ground, due to Thor's will to tear through anything that was even somewhat appetizing. Guests navigated the devastation, murmuring in incredulity, attempting to comprehend the entire catastrophe that had transpired before them. Karen, now being resolutely brought to a police vehicle, had not yet relinquished her battling spirit. Her hair was unkempt, her outfit was damaged, and she appeared on the verge of frothing at the mouth. She repeatedly glanced back, her eyes aflame with rage, uttering incoherent exclamations. This is not concluded. I will litigate against you for every cent you possess. You have marred my niece's significant occasion. You are a complete menace. Her tirade was abruptly interrupted as she stumbled over a toppled centerpiece, falling dramatically into a heap of goat excrement. The ensuing hush was overwhelming. An individual in the audience, likely a wedding attendee fatigued by Karen's numerous outbursts, began to chuckle. Another guest emitted a snort, then attempting to conceal it with a cough. Subsequently, as though a dam had ruptured, the entire assembly exploded into uncontrollable laughing. Even the officers accompanying her to the squad car had to avert their gaze, their shoulders trembling in an attempt to uphold their professionalism. Karen, utterly humiliated, hastily rose to her feet, scanning her surroundings as if seeking someone to hold accountable for the cruel jest the universe had just inflicted upon her. Her niece, the bride, stood nearby, obscuring her face with both hands, evidently wishing to vanish. The cops successfully placed Karen in the rear of the vehicle, despite her continued vocalizations regarding litigation and retribution as they shut the door behind her. Mrs. Thompson, always the opportunist, captured one final image of the incident with her phone, winking at me as she did so. She stated with enthusiasm that it would be posted on the neighborhood Facebook group. I may even be featured in the local bulletin provided I compose an adequate caption. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Ensure the accurate spelling of trespassing. I would prefer to avoid providing Karen with any grounds for legal threats. With Karen eliminated from the situation, the wedding guests gradually began to regroup, attempting to restore their diminished dignity. The bride and groom, who had remained in astonishment throughout the turmoil, finally approached me, appearing totally mortified. The bride expressed her profound apologies, her voice soft yet earnest. We were completely unaware of her actions. She informed us that she had reserved the space lawfully. We would not have consented to this had we been aware. Her fiancé acquiesced, massaging the nape of his neck. We do not wish for you to believe we were involved in this. Truthfully, if we had the opportunity to travel back in time and elope, we likely would. I observed them for a time, attempting to ascertain whether they were being truthful or merely attempting to placate the situation. The ashamed expressions on their faces were sufficient evidence that they had been equally taken by surprise as I had been. I ultimately concede to your assertion, I remarked with a sigh. I genuinely do not hold you accountable. Karen is simply Karen. The bride produced a faint smile. That is an understatement. I surveyed the ravaged venue, observing the goats nonchalantly grazing on the remnants of the decorations before redirecting my gaze towards them. It is evident that you did not request this turmoil, especially on your wedding day. If you choose, I will assist you in establishing a little area in the rear pasture. It will not be extravagant, but it will be tranquil. One can have a genuine moment devoid of all this triviality. Their eyes illuminated as if I had just presented them with a golden ticket to salvation. The bride exclaimed, grasping her groom's hand, "That would be extraordinary. I sincerely appreciate it. We simply wish to marry today. That was our sole concern. Consequently, I asserted, let us actualize it." Assisted by a handful of remaining visitors, we successfully cleared a small section behind the barn, constructing a makeshift altar with wooden crates and wildflowers gathered from the field. It was uncomplicated, unrefined, and a stark juxtaposition to the opulent debacle Karen had attempted to orchestrate, yet it possessed an element that the previous wedding was devoid of: authentic joy. The officiant, who had remarkably remained present despite the circumstances, stood at the front, while the guests who opted to stay assembled around. The bride and groom stood united, liberated from the turmoil, merely two individuals eager to commence their lives together. At that moment, as the sun descended behind them, illuminating the field with a golden hue, it was undeniably magnificent. The goats remained present, observing with subdued curiosity. However, they had abandoned their fervor for destruction and were now only grazing in the vicinity. Even Peanut, the small mischief maker, appeared satisfied to observe. Upon the conclusion of the ceremony, the couple embraced in a kiss amidst the applause of their attending friends and family. I applauded in unison with the others, notwithstanding the bizarre circumstances that had culminated at this moment. The bride glanced at me as the guests began to socialize, her demeanor gentle. "You are not obligated to do this for us," I remarked. "Perhaps not, but I concluded that something positive ought to arise from today." She exhibited a smile. "Indeed, it occurred, and it will remain unforgettable." The remaining visitors assisted in clearing the most significant debris, although complete restoration of my property would require several additional days. As the sun descended, the remaining visitors departed, leaving me in the tranquil field with my goats, who had effectively consumed the leftover pieces of food. Mrs. Thompson approached me, arms folded, as she assessed the damage. She remarked that it was the most captivating experience she had encountered in years. I smiled smugly. I sought to satisfy. She chuckled. "Are you aware that Karen intends to attempt something? She struggles to cope with shame." Indeed, I acknowledged, extending my limbs. "However, I'm aware that she has a whole community of individuals who witnessed her downfall. She will have few allies." Mrs. Thompson acquiesced, content. "If she attempts anything, you know where to locate me. I own ample footage to illustrate to her the consequences of antagonizing a farmer." I laughed softly as my goats began to nestle in for the night. I believe I will sleep well with that knowledge. As I turned to return to my residence, I cast a glimpse back at my property, now enveloped in the remnants of the most peculiar day I had ever experienced. It was not flawless. It was chaotic, absurd, and replete with unforeseen calamities. Ultimately, it transpired precisely as intended.